Good evening and welcome to the December 19th, 2022 Policy Committee meeting of the School District of Haverford Township. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll note that we are starting this committee meeting late with apologies. The board was meeting in executive session to discuss a personnel matter. We will begin with going into our agenda items. We have 7 policies on tonight's agenda, and I will turn it over to our solicitor, Justin Barbetta, to help us go through them.
Thank you, President Wiedemann. And so my understanding is there's a desire to start with the carryover policies from the last committee meeting, which would be 912, research involving district students and staff, which also has an accompanying AR. That is a proposed new policy. Policy 918, which is Title I parental involvement, along with an AR, that is an existing policy. And then policy 920, which is campaigning and other political activity on district property, which is also a proposed new policy.
And that had been on a previous agenda that we didn't get to, so that's why it's a carried over. It had not yet been discussed.
Correct. President Wiedemann, do you want to start with 912?
Yes, let's start there. And since we've seen this before, do you want to just let us all know the extent to which there are any changes from what had been previously discussed? This had gone to a regular public board meeting, had comments from the public, discussion amongst the board, and then the board at that point opted to send it back to committee for some further discussion. But does the version that we're looking at reflect any changes from what went to the board?
It doesn't actually. Due to the discussion at the regular meeting, my understanding was that there was a desire of the committee to further discuss the regulation more specifically. And in particular, I believe internal review board processes was one major point. What we did do is provide an example that we have used in another district related to IRB and incorporating that into a process. But really, this is just going to be starting an open conversation with the committee members as far as revisions that were requested to move forward, if at all.
Okay. Yeah, I recall that in the public board meeting, this was one of the discussions that benefited from the experience of our board members who are in education settings and are familiar with research. I think there was a comment that the district, Dr. Rushi, has not accepted or entertained requests for research, that it was easier to say no, and there was a question about whether that positions our district to be assisting with the professional development and training of people pursuing the field of education, and whether we wanted to look at kind of setting some limits on a number that we could support during the year. And then there were comments from board members about the rigor and standards of what it means to do research, and I will open it up to the board to continue that discussion.
I guess just as a first point, so right now this would be a new policy, and so the status quo would be to not have a policy on this at all. And so the question is, because this has never actually happened in the district, trying to look into the future and think what could happen, is what's outlined here the most beneficial to the district, right? In being able to have a roadmap of, if this comes up, if this is brought to the superintendent, this would be your roadmap, both the policy and the AR. And so my first question would be, would this be helpful? And if so, or if it needs to be tweaked, then how do we do that? And if not, then what is the policy for, right? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Dr. Rishi, but that's sort of, I think with all the policies, anyone who watched the Thursday's meeting knows that I sort of waxed a little poetic about what the role of the board is, but it certainly is to make sure that our district is functioning in a way that is transparent and foreseeable, right? And that you can look at the policy and know what the steps that the district's going to take. So that's my biggest question on this policy specifically, since it would be a new one.
Sure. So if you take a look at this and the requests can come in, I guess, two, at least, or maybe more ways. One, an outside agency, institution of higher learning, the institution itself, maybe not the students there, but could be looking to do something. We have not had that, and that's what predominantly when I say we've not had those requests in the 8 years that I have been here. We have received requests from individual students who might be pursuing a master's or more likely doctorate degree. My reasoning, if I say yes, if Ms. Wiedemann were to come to me, I'm studying something about the instruction of reading, and I'd like to, survey students or survey teachers, not even involve students. If I say yes to that, I have to create time in the day when that can happen. Mm-hmm. So when that's happening, something else is not happening. And those requests, have come in to us, and I have said to people, I don't know if it's unique to our district, I don't know if it's unique to this region with all of the institutions of higher learning, but we frequently get a lot of those requests. Mm-hmm. So if I say yes to one, what would be the basis upon which I would say no to another?
What else? Yeah.
And so that's why I pretty much have across the board said, we will not take time out of our day to allow students to participate, in outside studies. Even if I said to, I support your work, but if you want to just ask our teachers, that will be interpreted as, well, do I have to do I have to participate? Is it really optional? Mm-hmm. When do I participate? So it really does all come down, that's my barometer. Where's the time going to come from in looking at that? Now, where would a policy be helpful? I haven't had a need for it, but I haven't had a need because no one has really challenged that, where I've had to say, well, our policy, doesn't permit that, or our policy only allows X number, and, we've already engaged with a number of individuals doing that. Could that happen down the road? Yeah, probably. Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Rishi, to that end, let's, if someone were to potentially challenge and you had no policy to fall back on, I'm thinking about what would be helpful in terms of making that decision. What then would you be able to rely on without an actual policy in place?
And that's actually the sample that Justin provided to us. If I looked at that, and it specifically states in there that it will not take away from the instructional day. Okay. So that's one of the things that I would recommend if we move forward with that, mm-hmm. that we have language that says, and then I can look at and say, our policy or the regulations that accompany our policy prohibit the use of the, any time during the instructional day to be utilized for this.
And I think that's in the AR. It says, in general, instructional activities will not be interrupted unless there's a clear significance for the educational program of the schools, mm-hmm. for the district schools. So, I think that's capturing. Mm-hmm.
Strengthen it a little bit.
Yeah, number mm-hmm. 5, I think that's very reasonable.
And so right now, the purpose starts, unless required by law, the district and its employees will generally not permit the facilitation of educational research or surveys involving district students and or staff by outside entities, but under limited circumstances as described in here. So it generally establishes that this is not a common practice, is not the path that we would take, but under certain limited circumstances. Is it helpful to have those limited circumstances? Or is it more helpful to just stop and say, unless required by law, we generally don't permit research or surveys?
That's most helpful. I mean, that would be the most helpful. I mean, it's clear. It's not really left up to interpretation.
Do you see some value or benefit accruing to the district and say our ability to attract or get exposure to potential staff or, for recruiting or things like that, if we were to allow some limited times when research or surveys were conducted in our district?
I don't know about recruiting of staff as much as, maybe there is something that, one of the local universities, a study that they're undertaking that, we think would be beneficial to learn I could say under those circumstances, maybe coming and saying to the board, this is an exception that we would like to make because we think, that the results of this could be beneficial to the district.
Seems like maybe we make this a lot more streamlined and tighter and make it, I think we split up those first two sentences and say it's generally not permitted, period. And then say, under limited circumstances, a request could be considered.
Instead of granted.
Instead of granted.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if this could get us in trouble with the union, though, because I know on the salary scale, if you have a doctorate, you can earn more money, but we're potentially not allowing our staff, let's say they want to engage in education research in their classroom or in their school, we're not allowing them the opportunity. They'd have to take some sort of leave or sabbatical. We're making it more difficult. So I'm wondering if that could become an issue with the union.
I think right now, like, the status quo is you can't do it.
They're not.
Right, and so I think if there's some value in that, then we could write it in, right? And that, but I think it makes sense to say, as a general matter, it's not permitted. And then, under limited circumstances, and we can discuss here what we think they might be, then it could be considered.
I think that if we are moving in that direction, general matter, under certain circumstances, there is considerable amount of language that I would like to just see adjusted here. So I will put my IRB hat on for a moment, having sit on the Institutional Review Board. I would just like to see that more specifically laid out in terms of not just any governing body, but an actual Institutional Review Board. We have it at the bottom, which is number 1, but I think that needs to be very clearly stated further at the top.
And you're in the
AR. In the AR, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm looking at the AR.
Sure.
So in the AR, it's number 1, excuse me. It talks about the IRB, but I would also like to see it introduced in the 1, 2, 3. The 4th paragraph where it starts off, written proposals must. I think there's opportunity
The
to.
4th paragraph in the guidelines.
Guidelines, yep.
I think there's an opportunity to add it there. Additionally, I'm going to go back down.
And you add sort of this similar sentiment that it must be approved
By an institutional review board, yes. And then, if I go back down to number 2, the next sentence where it says the objectives of the research should be stated clearly and unambiguously, I think that the use of unambiguously is not clear. I think that's so subjective to what does that mean?
All right, so maybe just stated
It's not
clearly.
ambiguous to me, the writer of it. Yeah, right.
Right.
Clearly.
Must be stated clearly, okay.
Yes.
As somebody who does not have a professional experience in academia, adding the IRB, does that Dr. Larson, comport with the example that you brought up of staff seeking to get an advanced degree? Is that captured with an IRB approved study?
No, because if you don't have the permission of the district to conduct research, I think it's a separate, it's more of like an employment and salary scale type issue. So
Okay,
think
I just didn't know if somebody were pursuing a master's or a doctorate, would they fall under the
Anytime you're
IRB
working
protocol?
with human subjects, you have to have it
Yes.
approved by IRB before you can even send out a
Okay.
questionnaire.
So that's
So they would not
consistent.
be able to, my understanding is they would not be able, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
They would not be able to come to us with a proposal and like, here's the questions we're gonna ask, because it has not yet been approved by the
Right.
institution's IRB.
Okay,
So once it then is approved that, you know, everything is done legally and ethically, and appropriately for the type of research being done, then they would be able to reach out to districts and say, here's the study that we are proposing.
okay.
And if, that's true, and if so, if any potential researcher students are not following that protocol, like, if they come to us first, having not going to the IRB, that's a huge red flag.
Like disqualifying.
Very
That's,
no, that's very much no.
that's, you're all done with your program.
It
So
has
we-
been considered, the answer is no. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it's useful then we looked at that sample, the sample ARs from a neighboring district, and I'm wondering, I mean, it looks like they define the terms up front. It's like, this is what IRB means, this is what ORE is, this is what ORPs, I mean, there's a whole list of acronyms there. And that's just up front, and then it walks you through the steps of like how you need to adhere to each of those requirements. I'm just wondering if we might want to borrow some of that language.
For the AR,
Looking at the AR at the moment, let me see if I have the,
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to put that sort of in our AR as well.
I think that would address some of Dr. King's concerns.
I think, you know, with making this scope change, what are the limited circumstances where we think it's appropriate? I mean, do we want to lay that out?
I don't think so.
Or is that
Every
up to
study-
Dr. Rushi's
well, every
discretion,
study
or
is so
superintendent's
different,
discretion?
right? So
Okay.
that's the thing, like, I don't think you could possibly forecast all the
Okay.
education research that could potentially be done, but I know, I do a lot of research on out-of-school time, and some of the, not my research, but other researchers, have come across their work, like, they take students on field trips at no cost to the district, and like, maybe like a very low-income rural area,
Okay.
where the students don't have access to field trips routinely, so like, that would be a huge benefit for that school district, right? So like,
We don't
I
need to
was thinking-
factor stuff like that in.
right,
Well, I
like,
was
how would we
thinking-
put that in our AR? It's so specific, right? So,
Yeah.
To the
but that's just an
superintendent's
example of
discretion.
like,
I think superintendent's discretion
Yeah.
definitely makes sense, but
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking more like, do we want to say a limited circumstance? It has to be a benefit to the district.
well, so I
Right,
thought that
I
was
mean-
already in there under the ARs though.
Well, but it's not, I guess my question is, when we're looking at the policy, what is
Policy.
the policy saying?
Okay.
Right? And so it's not saying that much. And so if we want to put up front that that's one of the necessary factors,
Absolutely, yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
need not apply if you
Yeah.
don't meet that. That's what I was thinking,
Yeah,
to sort of, like I said, like tighten up the policy itself.
yeah.
I
So
think-
such requests may be considered in cases with significant benefit to the district, something like that.
Right,
I think
and then
that's
I could,
reasonable.
and I think we add at the superintendent or her
Yeah.
designee's
Yeah.
discretion.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that gets a little tricky though, because I mean, did we get like caught in like pay to play, or like if you let us research, we'll give you classroom libraries for all your elementary rooms, like where do we kind of draw the line on a significant benefit to the district?
Mm.
So I think we need to be very careful about.
Would
how
that
we
be
word
part
that.
of an IRB approved study to have that kind of,
I don't,
You need to
tit
state
for
up
tat?
front, like what you're giving to
Yeah.
people, or, yeah.
Has to be a part of, yeah, like what Dr. Larson just said, you can't change your mind and slide something in that this one district likes over the other.
Right, it's
'cause
like,
then
oh, you're thinking of leaving the study, let me give you like $50 to Target or something. Like, yeah, I mean, you can't do that, so.
but I mean, I think it would be up to us to decide, is this in our, or Dr. Rushi in this
Yes.
case, like, how does she feel like this contributes relative to, whatever disruption or effort it might cause on the district side? So I mean, I do think that's kind of up to her to decide. I don't necessarily think we can quantify that in some
Yeah.
way, right?
I totally agree, and I
Yeah,
think
but
that
if-
brings practice into policy,
Yeah.
right? Because right now our current practice is at the discretion of superintendent. And that's the whole policy, right? And it's unwritten. And so I think if we want to, if that's what we want to do, we want to continue it, then we make that part of the policy at her sole discretion.
I'm wondering, and I'm talking for myself right now, but if it would make sense for us all to maybe look at more exemplars of this policy and kind of come up with some things that like resonate with us. We're like, yes, that's language we want to adopt, or, because I think we're still kind of murky on where we're at on research in the district, period. Maybe just to see what else is out there. I mean, I appreciate seeing the one exemplar from another district, but maybe.
So,
Is that the gold
spoiler,
standard?
spoiler alert.
There's only one?
Yeah, it's extremely rare.
Okay.
And what I can share with you all is, that being essentially the lone time that it's been drafted that rigorously, it's never really come up again.
Okay,
So-
weird. Forging new best practice.
Right.
Better late than never.
I had just one comment under the delegation of responsibility, and it's a question. It says when an outside entity has been approved, number one says disclosure to the parent/guardians or the student if the student is 18 years of age or older of the purpose, nature, scope, and goals of the educational research or study. And I guess I questioned the parents or the student. Is once a student turns 18, the parents wouldn't get the notice, or should that be and if the student is 18, the student as well?
I mean, you could do both. I think, I mean, I would say for FERPA best practices, it may not be required, but you can certainly do both.
I think just in practice, that's a little easier too, to instead of being mindful of like, oh, this student turns 18 in March and that
Sure.
one's April and we're in between
Sure.
that, right?
Why go
So,
through the effort
yeah,
of
why,
distinguishing?
so
Yeah.
maybe making that an and.
I think we had discussed at a previous meeting, point 2 there, about not having to opt out of the research, but just leaving it, you opt in, but also knowing that consent is an ongoing process throughout the research with the option to leave the research at any time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point that was brought up in previous discussion and comment.
And to add on to Dr. Larson's point about you can discontinue participation anytime, that also goes for the student. Like, let's just say a parent signed them up, and if the 13-year-old said, no, not today, that's over. That wouldn't be able to continue as well. I think it's important to have that language.
Totally agree.
It's also required by IRB. You have to have both.
Okay, it sounds like this IRB covers a lot of bases for us.
It's really very an intensive process. Like, it's not just like, here's my paperwork, okay, here you go. Like, it's very rigorous and time consuming to go through IRB, so.
And that was another thing I liked about the other district's policy, where they mentioned you need to have city training, which is like that 8-hour training that you have to go through to renew to like even be qualified to apply for IRB. So like, it's really laying out the steps and the layers of complexity, protection.
I think we're getting there on the policy itself. I think we've suggested a lot of really good revisions. We could probably see another revision to the policy next time, and maybe for the board to take a look at the ARs and see either if we just want to wholesale take a lot of this example and put it into ours, or mix them. But I think it would be a lot to go through in this meeting. And we are still trying to end at 9 o'clock with some time before that for public comment, so.
One of the things I think that has come up a few times, and maybe that was a point of concern to send it back to committee, was the question of whether or not anybody that was conducting the research that needed to be in the school would have to have background checks and all of that. You know, we agreed anybody coming into the school has to follow that policy as a visitor, but did we want to explicitly state that somewhere and reference that policy just to cover all the bases?
Do you want to add language requiring just full clearances?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I mean, they would have to do it because they're a visitor, right? Any visitor that would be,
Have
Not that-
Is that right?
Well, there's different kinds of
Background
visitors.
check.
Remember?
So
that wouldn't necess-
Yeah,
that
we
wouldn't-
did
You know
that.
what? Yes, do
Okay,
it, I think.
okay.
Yeah, I think full
absolutely.
clearances makes a
May
lot
as
of
well,
sense.
May as well, yep.
Are we ready to move on to 9:18?
Yes, I think we're gonna continue to table that for the next policy meeting, and we'll move on to was it 13? Is that what you said?
9:18. So 9:18 is Title I parental involvement. It is an existing district policy. The policy was last revised, or was it, I'm sorry, it was adopted in 2006. And I believe the last set of revisions may actually have been upon the adoption. So there are some significant updates in the policy, and I'll start there. Primarily with the definition of parent, guardian, and family member. I know that the committee and the board are making a conscious effort to include both parents and guardians. The "and family member" actually comes from federal law that refers to Title I.
And is that because the program does have that family programming with it? The intent is to have families engage in the school. Dr. Rishi, is that something you can speak to?
I don't know if legally that's the intent of it, but yes, there's a lot of parent-family, even nightly events that at the schools that receive
I've been to
Title I
some great
dollars.
literacy
Yeah.
fairs and things
Mhm.
like that our schools have
Yeah.
put on.
And it encourages them to bring, for family members to attend. But I don't know if it's legal. I mean, I don't know if there's a legal requirement for the
Or
language.
legal, or,
Justin
yeah,
would
per
answer
the
that.
I don't,
program.
and honestly, it's just the language that the federal code uses, so
Okay.
without taking a deeper look, I would have to look into that.
It makes sense to mirror it
Mirror.
either way.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, we receive funds through Title I for parent and family engagement. That's what it's called in the.
So some of the updates, and I'll kind of speak in generalities. There were some significant revisions to the two primary sections of federal code that apply to Title I back in 2015. And the revisions really did focus on engagement with the school communities. And so the majority of the revisions that you're going to see throughout the document are incorporated from those revisions to the federal code. And frankly, they're really robust provisions. So some of it was taken almost directly from the code. And we're also working in conjunction with PSBA did produce a model some years back once these revisions took place, and we've incorporated some of that language as well.
On the policy itself, are there comments or discussion?
I guess my question would be like, what are the major, so this was last updated in 2006, right? But S has happened since then. Federal law and requirement has changed around Title I since then. I know we've gone through audits and we keep like copious records around how we account for those funds. So we have been abiding by current federal law, even if it wasn't reflected in our policy, right? Because this is 16 years old now. Well, okay, let's say it's 7 years old, 7 years out of date. Right, so like our practices, now we're just trying to get the policy to match the practices, is that correct?
Yes, and it's helpful that you raised that, because in the monitoring visits that has been reviewed, and one of the recommendations that we update the policy, but it's not saying that we're not following what we should be doing.
Okay. So sorry, just to clarify, Justin, so this reflects the ESSA updates?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
got it. And the citations are updated as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yes.
I had a question about one of the citations under the requirement kind of at the end of the policy about notifying parents and family members of the Title I programs. It says a copy of this policy and the school parent and family compact. And there's a footnote, but when I looked at the footnote to see what the compact was, it wasn't taking me to that. So maybe check on that. But is that a document that would be linked and kind of then attached to this policy or the ARs?
So one thing, and I would certainly defer to the administration, I mean, there are template documents. I don't know if you necessarily want to get in the habit of adding a specific document for a specific school each year, since they may be updated each year. I don't know.
Because the schools may change, like.
That, right.
Okay.
We have had years in the past where Chestnut Log has qualified to receive Title I funds, and then other years where they have not.
Mm-hmm.
So those, and that compact is identified for each individual building. I mean, the content of it is pretty much the same, but it is sort of personalized to the building,
Right.
if you will. So I don't know that it would be attached to this as much as part of the Title I documentation at each building, or with Christina Carter, who works on federal programs.
Okay, then maybe the location of that notation
To
or is
identify
kind of
that.
Mhm. I was
a
gonna
a
suggest-
question, like maybe it needs to be cleaned up or what it's meant to be referencing to,
Maybe
if
adding a
not to that
definition at the top, since it's going to be referenced.
throughout. And then I wondered if the title of this policy is called Title I Parental Involvement, and since we are being sensitive to parent/guardian family, like if we wanted to include that language in the actual title of this policy.
And it's changing to engagement too, right?
Yeah,
Instead
parent
of
and
right.
Instead of
engagement.
involvement.
Good catch, yeah. And then I just had one note, there's, under delegation of responsibility, it's lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they are all ing words except for the fifth one that says provide, just to make that flow with the other provisions. Did anyone have any other comments on the policy itself before we look at the ARs?
Under the purpose, it specifically talks about achievement of state academic standards, but since the focus of the district really is on a whole child, state academic standards is obviously a really important measure of achievement, but it's not our only measure of achievement. So I was wondering if we just wanted to strike that and just say achievement by students and just make it a little broader.
So it actually has to be.
Okay,
it
that
does.
was what I was
It does.
wondering. And then, is there an AR that goes with this?
Yes.
Mhm.
There
Yes.
is, okay. Did
Yeah.
I not see it somehow? Okay.
Yeah,
I think I just missed
it's
it.
very
Okay.
lengthy.
Okay.
It's
What
4
I just
pages
missed,
long.
Sorry. Yeah, because I was just wondering, some of them, like under authority number 2, to include parents, guardians, and family members in the development of the district's overall plan, like, it's just kind of vague, so that's why I was thinking, like, we either need to clarify that, but if there's an AR, I'm assuming it's,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I missed that one.
Right, the AR then will outline some of those specific
specifics,
strategies and
yeah.
activities.
Okay, and that's great, because if there wasn't, then I was gonna say, then we need an AR to clarify that, but there is one, sorry.
Right. I think this is an example of, yet again, when there is so much kind of regulation to some extent around the programs that the district operates, that we are trying to keep up with what is already required. And yeah, like
To reflect
questions
that.
about the language, that's language that, this program operates with that.
I got it now. I got the AR now. Sorry, I missed it the first time. Here it is.
No
Okay,
worries.
sorry.
I do have a logistical question about why we're capitalizing student. I mean, it just,
And that's in some of tonight's policies, but not others, and that seems like one of those cleanup, I appreciate
Sure.
that,
Yeah, it
like,
seems
so
the
small,
distinction,
but-
sometimes it's child, sometimes
Yeah.
it's he or she or things like that, so
Sure.
student is
Sure.
a good word, but yet it's used inconsistently. and-
What is the committee's preference? And we will.
I guess it's just I don't like things that are capitalized if it's not defined, and I don't think that we need to define student.
Okay.
That's my preference, is
Okay.
to not have it capitalized.
And the sense that it is capitalized is the background information of that, like something like, we mean a student enrolled in our
Right.
district, attending our schools is a capital
That
S
would be
student.
like student in district, or like, you know what I mean, that would have its own definition with it, that's what I would think, and so I just think when we have a capital, I would like it to, and I mean, district, I like capitalized, so, that's us, but I think for student, I'd rather have it just not have it capitalized unless it's part of a definition.
Okay.
Okay.
We will make those revisions, probably to all of the,
Yeah,
Oh,
all the
what
ones
is it?
tonight for sure.
okay.
So I'm just going back to our discussion of the use of parent versus guardian. So I'm digging around on ESSA, NCLB definitions. It looks like they define parents to refer to natural or adoptive parents, legal guardians, persons standing in loco parentis, and then there's some details there. So I'm wondering if we put that in our definitions. That way we're making it clear that we are having, we have an expansive definition of parents. We're also using the language of federal law.
Is that different from what the definition is now?
Is it defined, do we define parents there?
Yeah.
Under purpose,
Parent, guardian, and family member.
But there's not a reference maybe to that specific language to show that it mirrors it, so we could pick that up. But I think, yeah, this does a good job of a broad.
Dr. Wilson, I can incorporate that in the,
Okay, yeah, just have a
Yeah.
citation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on the AR for this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I see, it frequently talks about like flexible number of meetings or opportunities for parents, guardians to review. Can I have an example of what that opportunity of meetings would be? Like, for example, looking at.
Which one are you looking at?
I'm on the AR for 918. And so under guidelines, the second paragraph.
The schools would have a flexible number of meetings on morning and evening, parent, guardian, family. So that they will have actually a Title I parent meeting.
And it's actually called, it's labeled as a Title I parent meeting. Okay.
Yeah. And they'll send the invitations to the parents of children who are receiving
Okay.
Title I services.
Okay.
And there might be a day offering and also an evening offering
Gotcha.
in different times.
Okay. So it's not something that is like school district publicized. It's specific to families that may be benefiting from. Okay, got it. Thank you.
With that being said, there are times when they might have a literacy night.
I was gonna say, that's probably more
And they
open to the
may
whole
do,
school
and they may
community.
do something a little bit different in that, within the context of that evening.
Okay.
Or, so children who receive Title I services might also have a book bag that they can bring home, or like something that's additional over and above for them. But it would still be a building-wide event that everyone can attend.
Okay,
And they
that was my
wouldn't
next
refer to
question.
that as a Title I parent meeting, but there would be an opportunity for everyone to attend.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest question on the ARs is just to make sure that the district has reviewed it, that these make sense and what the current practice is. And, that this is what would be the best practice for the district.
And we did have Christina look at this
Okay.
in light of the input that we got from our last monitoring visit as well.
Oh, great.
And so with that, do we think this is close enough? I know there's some language cleanups and some references, but is this something that the committee would like to see go to the board for a first reading?
I think so.
Yeah.
All right.
We don't have a lot of wiggle room with the wording here, so I think.
Yeah, right.
All right, making progress.
so we're ready to move to 920.
Yes.
So this is a proposed new policy. So it's not in the district's current manual. It's entitled Campaigning and Other Political Activity on District Property. It's just a policy at this point. This is based largely off the most recent PSBA model. So it defines what campaigning or political activity in the campaigning context is. It's really a regulatory policy. It's not required legally. And obviously, the district is required to be viewpoint neutral. And it does achieve that goal as well. So it's really open for discussion, consideration to the committee.
I have a lot of thoughts on this one.
Yeah.
I don't want to control the conversation if others would like to start. But I certainly have questions and comments.
Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I guess my first comment is, whether this is the right section for this even, because like, are we regulating the public here? Our 900 section is about our relationship with the public, right? I mean, the rest of it is like communications and outwardly, and I think, this is really more about like what students can do and employees, and it doesn't seem to fit here, in my opinion, in the community section of the, of our policies. And then, so, then a similar question is, do we need this? My understanding would be that there would be a staff manual that would apply for these types of activities. I know there's a student handbook about, the types of things that they can do. And so what is the policy adding, in this capacity? And is there a district need for it? And if so, is this policy meeting that need?
If I can just piggyback off that, we have multiple policies currently on political activities, and they fall in the 500s, 400s, and 300s.
So under the employee sections for staff.
That makes a lot more sense, even just with the language here. It doesn't seem like this language is geared towards the community for a lot of very obvious reasons. And so, to be honest, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with putting it in the community section. And thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Larson, that it's in other places in our policy book, because, that comes back to my question of whether there's a need for it to be here.
I can speak initially to it. This is another one of those policies where, it's not something that has been problematic, or even when it, pertains to the use of buildings on, primary and general election days. We have not had any problem with signage, with, people we call and say, oh, you need to wait, your sign can't be out there. I think that happened once at one of our schools. Your sign is up a little bit too early. Right away. I mean, people have been very responsive to that. The only thing I thought is, with respect to people who are running for office, we've just had a practice that if it's an election year, then we don't have that person come and speak to a class. I mean, there have been times, where politicians have come and spoken to classes of students, but again, they've also been very receptive if we've said, not when you're running.
It's not a campaign event, it's a learning event.
Yeah, it's a
right?
learning event.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they have been fine, so the question is, am I asking for us to move forward with a policy like this? No, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're engaging in a comprehensive review of all policies. So what Justin is doing is bringing forth to us, these are policies that are in existence, in other places, or.
This is certainly not a recommendation. I probably should have disclaimed that from the onset. This isn't a recommendation from your solicitor, from legal. It's just an option.
Okay.
And frankly, I think the sentiments are pretty much the same across the board here, but the Constitution is what it is, and that's primarily what's going to guide this type of speech or activity.
And that's where I started to get nervous about, campaigning shall mean actively soliciting votes, campaign contributions, other forms of support. And then it talks about not limited to speech, apparel, or distribution. And I'm like, even apparel, like if you wear a shirt with a candidate, whether they are running for a district or a seat that covers our township or not, like, is that?
And that makes sense for staff, right? But for students,
And for
I think
students,
we're walking
right,
into
yeah.
like a minefield.
I totally agree. I have a lot of First Amendment concerns here. And I think to the extent that we don't need the policy, I don't think it makes sense to adopt it here. I don't like to have I don't like to have a reactionary, policy on policies, but I just think this is just fraught with a potential that someone thinks that they're complying with the policy. They then shut down some sort of speech that is protected by the Constitution. And we have a very big issue on our hands with people who were both very well-meaning, in their actions. And so I hesitate to recommend this one.
Any other comments or discussion?
I think if for some reason Dr. Rushi was starting to have problems with some aspect of this in the future, she could always come to us and say, hey, we need a policy on this, I need something on the books, and it could always come back. So I think that's reasonable.
Agreed?
Yeah.
All right, so this committee's recommendation is to not move forward with 920.
Yes.
All right.
So do we want to start at the top of the
Yeah.
agenda for this evening?
Yes.
So that would take us to 203, which is communicable diseases and immunizations. That is an existing policy. And the current version, I apologize, was last revised, I believe, upon adoption in 2010. So
Some stuff has happened in the world of communicable diseases and immunization since then.
So we gave it a bit of a refresher. We added some definitions that more or less are taken directly out of Pennsylvania code. Slight revision to the delegation of responsibility as far as adding superintendent or designee. The primary addition under that section is there is an annual reporting requirement that state law mandates that we follow. And again, that's something that the district does, but we're just adding it to the policy. And then we added two documents from the state Department of Health.
And these are like links to those websites.
Yes,
Yep.
and similar to what we did at our last meeting with regard to the gratis statement, where we just added it. This is a list of the required immunizations under the Pennsylvania School Code. So it's just a quick point of reference since we're talking about immunizations in the school context of what is actually required.
And I think for me, looking at this policy, I concluded that the language in here was meant to reference, mirror, match exactly what is required by Pennsylvania, whether the Department of Education, the State Health Department, that we are not adding, we are not tweaking, we are not making it something like different for our needs and purposes, but just saying we are going to direct the district to follow what the state is requiring us to do. Is that a correct interpretation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a similar reflection when reviewing this, these revisions, and to me, this one is purely about keeping up with what the law is today on the books and not was in 2010. And so I don't see very much wiggle room for the board to act here. I don't think it would be necessary. This is not our, area of expertise.
You're going to customize it.
Right. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have our policy reflect what the current state of the law is. Because again, I think it's just so much more likely that a student family in the district would come to our policies than try and wade through, what's going on at the state level. So, to have our policies be an accurate reflection of the state law is important. And, but I don't have any comments to the substance here, which are clearly coming from state law.
Do we want to jump onto the ARs then?
Sure.
I do like using student instead of child.
Yes.
That's where we have some wiggle room.
With a lowercase s.
With the lowercase s. Thank you.
So for the regulation, I actually don't believe the district previously had a regulation, but it had regulatory language in the prior version of the policy. So we did parse that out. And so I'll say it's a new regulation, but it's really just trying to put all of the regulatory language in the same place. We did add some language with regard to the immunization process, because there are, per the code, there are certain instances mandate, like if there's different timelines where different immunizations have to be scheduled in order for a student to start in the district, things of that nature. So we added some of that. It's all, again, taken directly from code. We also added a little bit of language regarding the transfer of health records, which is also directly from code. And again, that's another practice that the district, conforms with and applies on an everyday basis, but we're just making it part of the regulation. And there is one last reference to education on life-threatening diseases, which is also directly from code. And then it also references, as part of that subsection of state code, the opportunity for the parent or guardians to review related materials to that education process.
That's a curriculum.
Yes.
In connection.
Yes.
Yep. I think one of my questions in reading this, I think I expected that there would be a section also on communicating outbreaks of communicable diseases that I didn't see in the ARs. Is there, I'm just raising it as a consideration, like, is that something that could or should be included in here, or we're confident it's covered elsewhere in the communications, or could reference that?
It's at the discretion of the committee and the board. If we want to add a subsection, we certainly could.
Like, I think, like, as you reference, like, what would a parent look up? Like somebody's like, I heard a rumor there's whatever, some,
Lice.
like,
I mean,
right, that, and then they might go to our
Yeah.
policies to be like, was I supposed to be told about that? Like, and having some reference in there might be helpful just on setting expectations and letting, folks know that aspect of it as well.
I guess lice probably wouldn't fall under a disease. That's just the one I've
Headline.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking, I was thinking
Yeah.
of what a community, when you get the notification, I just,
Whooping cough,
Yeah,
or
right.
chicken pox, those kinds of things,
And that guidance typically, comes from,
like the county.
well, I guess now it would be.
Now
the
we have a county, yeah, which was not in
the past, it would
2010
be
when we passed
Pennsylvania
this.
Right.
Department of Health
well, maybe we could put something about that in there. Like, I just that the,
consultation with.
yes, right,
Mhm.
will,
Yeah.
the district will review and keep up to date on recommendations from the Delaware County Health Department, something like that.
And then also, while maintaining the confidentiality of the students
Yes.
involved. Okay.
Yep.
And I had a question, once we finish that point, on the ARs on page 2, second paragraph. It says the district may exclude students from school who are not properly immunized because of an applicable exemption during an outbreak. So let's say you're not immunized for smallpox, but there's a smallpox outbreak, so we can exclude that student. Then I went down to the exclusion procedure. Do those procedures apply to that student that we're excluding because they're not immunized against smallpox? Like, what is our responsibility to educate that student? Like, once we say you're excluded, you're not immunized, if that's the route we go, like, I'm assuming we are still required to provide an education to that student. And is that spelled out in this exclusion procedure, or is that something separate?
That's actually a great point, Dr. Larson. I guess before I get to those questions, this is actually a carryover from your prior version of the policy.
Okay.
So, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't catch every single, yes, we absolutely still have to educate the student.
Right, so I think this, the way it's written in from the old policy and brought over, it's a student who is absent due to the communicable disease, not necessarily preventative, us saying, oh, you're not immunized against this, and we have an outbreak of smallpox right now, so you can't come to school, you're excluded. Like, what is our responsibility to that student? I don't think that's spelled out in the policy.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure we make that clear.
Okay.
So this section that's carried over from our last version, the 2010 version of this, is this based on current policy or, not policy?
Practice.
It's based on practice, and so is this guided by state law? Or is this just best practices?
Some of this, I think, is the district's subjective process.
Okay,
Yeah, when you start referencing like the panel and things
Yeah.
like that, that's not required by state law.
okay.
So I mean, that's a great, I mean, it's not a legal issue. If you want to have kind of a review panel
Yeah.
in these instances, then you're
Yeah, just need to know
certainly fine to do
if this
that.
is the practice that the administration finds to be helpful and useful, then that makes sense. I just wanted to know, to what extent can it be revised?
Right, and to that point, like, what is our required timeline? Because I'm thinking if we're 10 days waiting for a panel to assemble, like, that's a lot of time the student's missing instruction. They could also be unwell and not able to engage in instruction. So I just want to get a sense of, like, what kind of timelines we're talking about.
And that actually, now that you mention it, Dr. Larson, I'm gonna have to take another look at this because I actually think there is a distinction between educating the child and then whether or not it's gonna be considered an excused or unexcused absence as well. So,
Right, they seem like
so
it's two
I,
separate.
yeah, so I actually, thank you for raising that.
I was thinking, yeah, we have attendance policy 204 coming up, and there are some cross references in that.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even putting that to the side, is this exclusion procedure something that the district wants to continue to have as its practice?
Oops.
As laid out in the AR? Or are there certain folks who should review it and?
Yeah, we'll have, like, I would not recommend that we move this forward to
sounds-
the
Yeah,
full board
that's-
for first reading. And perhaps, even like our lead nurse.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes sense to table this one and
Mhm.
have it reviewed, especially the AR reviewed. I know, Justin said he was gonna review part of it, and if we can have the lead nurse review and just see, like, is this practicable? This procedure, and is it what we would want to have, so.
And I think it gets murky pretty quickly if the student has an IEP or other, requirements that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
All good points. Yeah, my suggestion for the administrative regulation, there's a lot of terms of art maybe, or specific phrasing that flows through this that aren't defined terms, and there's not, like we see in other parts of the policy, like references to that kind of source definition. So required immunization, medical plan, statement of exemption, school physician, like those would maybe benefit from some definition or clarity around those concepts as they are in the ARs.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll come back to this one.
And it probably makes sense, we'll keep the policy and the AR together.
Yeah.
I think we're good. I think we sort of didn't do anything to it, but we'll
Right.
just keep them together for ease of reference. We're up to,
We're ready to move on to 204. So that is the attendance policy. It is an existing policy. You have an existing AR. It was both were actually revised. I want to say recently, I want to say 2020.
Yeah, it shows a 2020 date.
And so there wasn't much to revise. A little bit of wordsmithing in the purpose, but no substantive changes. And then just adding a delegation of responsibility to the policy itself, because it was kind of empty at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's more consistent with the framework that we have for the
Yes.
other policies.
Yes, and removal of definitions that would be repetitive, because the AR is actually pretty robust with definitions, and those definitions are already in the AR.
Yep,
I
that
would
makes-
point out that this policy, as brief as it is, has one of the longer lists
I
of
know.
referenced code and policy that I think just speaks to the extent to which this is very prescribed
Mm-hmm.
on, what attendance mean, what compulsory education is, what, this is not something that is at the district's discretion, but, and I will say, I went into these, these links and reference, I was kind of fascinated by the extent to which Pennsylvania Department of Education has thought over the years about, providing education to students and what attendance and excused absences and things are. It's kind of, a fascinating view of, days gone by in some cases.
Yep.
And also the importance of communicating that to parents, right? Making sure that they're aware of these requirements and get your kid to school, please.
Mm-hmm. So the ARs probably have more of content for our discussion, but does anyone have anything on the policy before we move on?
No.
Do you want to dig into the ARs? These might be some of the lengthiest ARs that we've been presented.
Yeah.
And
Sorry,
teeny
can I
tiny
just ask
font.
about attendance?
Yeah, why is it so small?
My
we can
question
fix
is
that.
related to compulsory school age. Do we need to put a provision in there, like up to 21 if the student if it's stipulated in their IEP? Unless
What?
I'm missing where.
I don't know if that's, I think it's
Or
probably
just looking at
defined.
compulsory school age.
Yeah.
It's just compulsory school
Got it,
age.
okay.
It's just compulsory school
Yep.
age.
Thank you.
I like that the definitions are up front.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really helpful for the same reason as before, with sort of like all these terms of art. Really intense.
So there wasn't all that much revision wise to the ARs, because like I said, it was just addressed about 2 years ago. We did kind of clean up the compulsory school age requirements, or well, actually, it's the exemptions. They were in a couple different places throughout, so we just streamlined them and put them all in one area under the guidelines section. Another set of revisions is under the excused absences, and adding some further clarification to the state standards, but really adding how in practice those terms can be defined. And then another significant revision was, as Dr. Larson said, the notification. This is one of the only policies, I won't say only, one of the policies that is explicitly required to be circulated by the district to the student body and to parents.
Okay.
So, and again, this is something the district does, but we just made sure it's incorporated into the manual.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it would make sense that we ensure that we're also following our legal requirement to provide information to parents in their preferred home language? I mean, this just seems so important to communicate. Like if you're new to the country and maybe English isn't your first language, and you're not, maybe in your country, your native country, like compulsory schooling wasn't necessarily a thing. Like there's a cultural difference there.
Sure. Sure, I will add that as we move forward. And then one other housekeeping item, which President Wiedemann, you spoke to the length of the policy. I took the liberty of removing the attachments that were incorporated into the body of the regulation, and then
Right.
just added them as Word document attachments, so.
Yeah.
So they won't be absent, they just won't be spelled out in the AR, they will be a
Yes.
link.
Right,
Okay.
rather than continuing to have to scroll and scroll and
Yes.
scroll and scroll.
Yeah, so
That's-
those, for the benefit of those listening, those attachments include like a sample template of the notice that a parent and guardian would get after a third unexcused absence, or of a continuing truancy issue, that like it kind of shows the forms and the language that gets circulated. So that's helpful.
I guess when I was reading this, I was just thinking, like, if for parents who are trying to have their student's absence excused, there's not really any information here in how they actually do that. Like, it says they have to require, or they, you know, for instance, educational travel, like they submit required documentation within the time frame. But like, where is that, and
To who?
how, like, to whom, and all of that. So, I don't know if that needs, I don't know how that fits into this, but, and it's certain things, like for an illness, like you would contact, you know, the building administrator or the building secretary or the student's teacher, or, you know, something like that.
And I wonder, now we have the school pass.
Ref-
Yeah, the app, now we have
Or
the
reference
app,
them
right?
to the school handbook, like, for lack of a better word, might not actually be a book, but reference them. They're the procedures that principals share, like, several times, but always at the start of the school year, and reference that way. If that changes, we're not changing this.
Yes, I think that would be
That's
great.
exactly right. That's perfect, yeah.
Can you speak to, so I know this year we changed the platform on which absence can be reported through the website or app to School Pass. Does that supplant the need to provide a written note or email? And should that be considered in lieu of the written note or email to,
Unexcused absence.
I first saw there, and under unexcused absences, it says absences are considered unexcused until the district receives a written note or email documenting a valid reason for the absence. But I believe School Pass provides that same notification, but maybe just to be clear on that. And then I think I should know this as a parent of a current student. I still send in a note afterwards to be like, you know, but is School Pass
Is it
alone
still required
sufficient,
that-
or do you
okay.
still need to like follow up afterwards?
I use School Pass, I just did that.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, and they
Nothing bad
call you, they
happened.
email you,
Okay,
they text
without
you.
another note, yeah, I'm kind of a, you know, I cover all my bases, I'm like, here, to send this note, explain why you were out.
Yeah.
I think there's a part in here that says, the excused absences, and somebody noted there's a list of like 10 things, from illness to, you know, a death of a family member, medical appointments, educational travel, religious occurrences, and then it says, or other urgent reasons which may reasonably cause a student's absence. So that's kind of a catch-all one. My question was, do we need to be clear on at whose discretion that is? Is that just up to a parent or guardian to assert it's a urgent reason, or is that something that needs to be considered and given some approval?
That's at the principal usually would.
So I think that goes to Dr. Crispin's comment about just maybe a little more clarity on the hows and in what form some of these things can be done to help parents work through that.
I have a question right where you're in that same section there, for letter J, which would have been a couple up from where we were, pre-approved religious instruction, limited to 36 hours per year. Is there any reasoning why this is designated by the hour versus the other two above are designated by days?
Sometimes we will be asked if a child can leave early
Okay.
for, you know, after
school day finish, okay.
for religious education that occurs at the end of a school day, but they may need to leave early, so they'll look at totaling it that way.
Okay. For the sake of how it's, you know, managed within the school day, how is the administration able to keep track of the per hour versus the per day? It just seems like it'd be more to keep up with. You miss 1 hour this day, you miss 2 hours this day, like, and then how is it, like on a report card, I'll see like days absence. I don't necessarily see a spot for hours unless I'm missing it.
It's not so much, that there doesn't occur where there are like 6 hours of the day it's usually like maybe 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, every Monday or every whatever, of the week.
Okay.
And then that would be something that the principal would discuss with the parent, and that would be documented when that child is leaving early for that purpose on a regular basis like that. Then X number of hours would equate to one school day. But then these would be considered excused absences.
Okay. And then another question, the next one says a bona fide observance of a religious holiday.
The bona fide there is taken out.
That's taken out, okay.
Yeah.
But I see it
Of a bona fide religious group.
again.
Mhm.
So bona fide is taken out in both places?
No, bona fide is the way that it's written now. It's observance of a religious holiday which is observed by a bona fide religious group upon prior written request from the person in parental relation.
Okay, so I guess my question still remains then, what are we classifying as a bona fide religious group?
I can answer that, Dr. Schiff.
I think that might be a term that courts you.
And that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
So Pennsylvania jurisprudence has defined, bona fide is used
Okay,
more frequently than you would think.
bona fide.
And an interchangeable concept, I would say, is the primary purpose test. There is a primary purpose test, but that's often how the courts will view an organization. It's a very boring concept, but articles of incorporation, the practices of the organization, types of meetings and things of that nature.
So it can't be just like declaring Festivus,
Right, right.
if for people who watch Seinfeld.
There would have to be,
I could write that for you.
there would have to be some substance and some evidence
Okay.
to support it.
The same sentence, what is the person in parental relation?
Oh, there's definition at the top.
That is in the defined
what we're
terms.
using?
That, and I believe that's actually directly from the code.
Okay, and that was my other question, okay. And we have to use that language.
Yeah, it's defined.
Okay, I don't love that, but.
This is one where there is, like I said, there is a
There's a
lot of code
yeah, that's
on
what
this
I'm
one. And I,
Such an awkward way to say that, and we have,
Right.
say parent guardian everywhere else, and I was like, why are we saying it so strangely here?
Maybe we should capitalize it.
No, but, I mean, if we have to say it that way because
Yeah.
of the law, then obviously that's the way we're gonna say it, but it's just such a strange way to say that, as if we're trying to make everything more, accessible to, parents and guardians, that's a strange way to say that, but it is what it is if we have to do it that way, so, thanks.
I think it is unusual in this one for the definitions, then I think of those as defined terms with capital letters, but they don't show up that way in the
I think it would be
AR
helpful
to have them be defined.
to have them
I mean,
either
in
be
capitalized?
in capital letters or in bold. That's what I like to see usually.
terms that
The-
are used.
Right,
The
so where
terms.
The
excused
defined
absence is used, have
Once-
it be
when in the
capital
body
E,
of
capital A,
the-
Yeah, right, so that so like, cause like to Dr.
Compulsory
Crispin's
school age,
question,
yeah.
I didn't see it at
if it was
first.
bolded or if it was in capitals, and she would know, oh, it's probably in the definition, right?
But, yeah,
Yep.
Understood.
absolutely.
And so, yeah, that's kind of just a stylistic thing, but I mean, looking at the school code, I saw there was a lot of provision. We didn't include all of them, obviously, and wouldn't need to, but this, can we say that this selection of reasons to have an excused absence or things like that are ones most pertinent to, occurring in our district? Or circumstances that the district has, like, more often encounters?
So I would, President Wiedemann, this is actually some carryover language too, because it's any of the revisions are actually highlighted.
Mhm.
So I can't personally answer that question. But this is carryover from, I guess, two years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was a question that the policy committee or the board considered at that point. But you're absolutely right, there's,
A ton of things in there,
Wasn't
Would M cover that?
educational travel in there? as an allowable,
It-
and our debate was how many of the days? I'm trying to remember from 2 years now.
It's in here.
It's always been a part of the code.
Mhm. I remember specifically talking about college visits and then those ones.
Yeah.
And then for M, it says other urgent reasons.
Mhm.
And that's when we're gonna add some, at whose discretion or
Right,
what
at the
process it
discretion
is
of the
to
board
make
principal,
that
right?
petition.
Mhm.
So what are we thinking about the readiness of this one?
It's another one where I thought we'd, I think we're all in line with the policy itself and,
Some cleanup, but
just some clean, yeah, I don't know if we had very many substantive comments to this one, more a couple things here and there.
Okay.
So we can attempt to have it for first reading.
Yeah.
try to get to the board.
You think you have all of our comments?
Yes.
Yes,
Good answer.
or the right kind of like guidance on
Sure.
them, right?
No,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm looking at the clock, it's nearing 8:40 and we have 2 policies to go through. They may be quick, so I will try to have a stop at 8:50 so we could leave time for public comment.
So we're gonna move on to 205, which is postgraduate students. This is a current policy. It was adopted in 2010. And I will say that I don't know what the impetus for this was, as it was drafted then. I would say that most districts, have kind of simplified the language, and it's really now just coming down to, the district not assuming responsibility for postgraduate students, or students who have reached the age of 21. So, and if you look at some of the school code citations that are part of the current version of the policy, they don't really actually speak to the substance of what the policy is. So,
So
that
Dr.
being said,
Yeah, I was gonna see if Dr. Rishi has examples of when this, like, is this a request that some policy is helpful on?
No.
This like gives me flashbacks of that recurring dream that maybe I didn't finish high school or I didn't go to class or something. I need to go back.
So the, yeah.
But yeah, and remember, now this does say, like, they are high school graduates. So there's, it's
Right.
not if someone,
Okay.
yes.
Doesn't
Fail
affect
to
You didn't
complete their
finish, you
requirements.
still be
your
coming
nightmare,
back,
still have to
Dr.
come
Larson.
back.
This is, the district does not have responsibility for those residents who are high school graduates.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know why we have all these extra words to basically say this.
Mhm.
So,
I don't understand the original policy, like, what was the purpose of that? Yeah,
right.
agreed.
So the proposal is to eliminate the policy as drafted and to go with the language that says the district shall assume no responsibility for making its educational program available to district residents who are high school graduates, nor after the end of a term in which a student has reached the age of 21 years. And then a little more on that, but
yes.
that sounds,
Can we say the district shall not be responsible for the continuing education of such residents in any other school district?
oh yeah, the board there, yeah.
But other than that, yep.
Mhm.
All right. So that one can go to the board
Mhm.
with that, language replacing the existing policy.
All right, one left. Let me do it. I'm done.
Sorry, I just have questions about this one. So, why might this policy be in place? Like, do people actually say, like, I want to go back to high school? Like, I'm like trying to understand, like, do we even need it on the books, I guess?
I think it's good to have just a disclaimer of responsibility for, I don't know if people want to go back to high school or not, but I think the new way that it's drafted makes a lot of sense.
But the original one makes it seem like we're sending our students to college and paying for them. Like, that's
Yeah.
how I read it, and I was like, wait, what is happening?
Yeah,
here?
no.
Why would we ever, what?
We're gonna have to talk to Larry about that one.
Yeah, I didn't understand, like, what was happening here, so.
Are there ever instances where we have high school students that could be like dual enrollment, taking community courses? Would this policy potentially speak to them in any way?
This would not prevent our students from being dual enrolled in the high school. This policy, at least the way I read it, this impacts those who already hold a high school diploma.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
our graduates, so they wouldn't be,
Alright.
yep.
We are done.
All right.
Right, or somebody who moves into the district with a high school diploma and says, oh, I'm here now, like,
Yep.
I want to go to high school, like, that,
Okay.
that's not available.
Yeah, because it says that it will consider the extension of the privilege of
Yeah.
postgraduate study from the
Yeah, I'm like,
regular
what?
educational
Are we
program.
defining post, so it's
Funny you
post-high
call it-
school graduation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be more clear. I mean.
Well, we're just gonna get
We're
rid
just
of it
gonna
all.
get rid of
Yeah.
it.
Great, perfect.
We're striking the whole thing.
Fabulous.
It's gonna be 2 sentences and it's gonna say we have no responsibility.
You may not go back to high school.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're done now.
Right.
So we're ready to move to 208.
Yes.
Yes.
That's withdrawal from school. It is currently in the manual. It was, I believe, last revised upon adoption in 2010. And this is one where there's really not a ton of legal background or framework in place. So there wasn't, and what is has not changed. So the only suggestions are to add a definition of what withdrawal from school actually means in this policy. And then one significant recommended revision was it's under the delegation of responsibility. It's not a very lengthy policy, so it could fit potentially under a different heading if the committee chooses. But to require written consent from a parent or guardian before approving the withdrawal of a compulsory school-age student.
Mhm.
Again, I know that that's something that's a practice that's in place, but it's just adding it to the policy itself.
So if not a lot of this one comes from law, then is this in line with what the district does and what they want to continue to do? And I agree that delegation of responsibility is awkward. That doesn't really seem to fit that header.
That is in line. I mean, this does not happen often.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not one of those that I consider and say has never
Mhm.
happened. This would be, what we would kind of at some point in time refer to, students who drop out. And what is articulated there in terms of counseling services and, trying to work with the student and with with their family, happens, to the best of my knowledge, but it happens. Our high school principal was consulted about this as well.
Okay.
Dr. Rushi, since you already mentioned that there is some sort of communication with the parent/family or guardians, is it helpful to have that language underneath of the delegation of responsibility? Just that it's clear that students aren't dropping out without any sort of outreach to the parents prior to their written consent.
Well, it is added as number 7, right?
You mean a step before that?
Right, before that, before we get there. Before I ask for your consent, I want it to be clear that we've already had some sort of communication.
They're sort of like involved in this,
Yes.
like the counseling that's happened,
Yeah.
yeah, at
Mhm.
like at the beginning step, not
Right.
the end step.
Right.
Oh,
I think
okay,
that makes a
just
lot
the
of
order
sense.
of it, right.
Yeah. Because I'm sure that it's happening, but, if someone can just think, I'll get someone to sign this form, I'm all done here, that's not exactly how that would work.
And I think that's consistent with the purpose of this policy, which says right up front, it is in the best interests of both the students and the community that students complete the educational program that will equip them with the skills and increase their chances for a successful and fulfilling life beyond school. Right, like that is the stated purpose. We want the kids to stay in school, and it sounds like these are the, activities that happen and kind of try to help kids make the best decision if they are thinking of withdrawing.
Now, what happens thinking about our attendance policy? So after 10 days of consecutive absences, I think it said you're withdrawn from school. Like, what happens if a student, maybe the parent doesn't know where they are, maybe they're living with someone else, or they're moving around. And, right, I guess I'm wondering how, like, if the student kind of self-selects that, like, I'm withdrawing, and there's like a situation, right? Like, what kind of, I'm not being clear, but like, I feel like that could happen, right? And then the student is automatically dropped from the system after those 10 days.
Right, so how does this dovetail with what we have in the attendance policy and the protocols around ensuring the student doesn't become truant?
Thank you.
We would not automatically drop a student without conversation with parents. So if they're as you said, like absent for 10 days, that wouldn't happen without consultation with the family. And if the student is not at home, living in the home, and there are other matters that need to be looked at in conjunction with the family and supporting the family.
Should a cross-reference or would a cross-reference to our attendance policy be helpful in this one?
The opposite might be true, that a cross-reference to this policy might be helpful in the attendance policy, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Seeing it that way, that
Yeah,
Yeah.
then.
this one has more
Right, so
leeway.
if we have the 10 days, then what happens? Well, this happens,
Mhm.
then we go through this process, right?
I agree.
Okay. Just when I was looking at the draft of this one, I would note that under the purpose, there are 5 links. When I clicked on them, they were all the same, so I don't know if that could be checked, because, the legal references cite different things, but I kept coming up with the same one with the links.
I think, President Wiedemann, I think that was a carryover from the prior version, but before any of these move forward to first read, I will make sure that the hyperlinks are correct.
Okay, yeah, because, I think it is helpful to understand the times in which we are following what is already prescribed for us, and those references are useful for that. Any other comments or discussion? Do we think this one is, with the changes noted, ready for a board read?
Yeah, I do think Dr. King's point is an important one, to sort of set out up front that the conversations with the family are happening. Either,
Yep, we
either
got that
number 1 or
noted.
number 2, yeah.
So maybe that sentence in red, no student of compulsory school age will be permitted to withdraw without following the procedures outlined below or something to that effect, as opposed to focusing just on the written consent of the parent.
So that sentence in red got moved to 7, but we could certainly add something either there or under the, the bulleted points to say that, like, the district will work with
Got it.
the
Okay.
family,
Mm-hmm.
or I mean, whatever.
And number 1 can be the student and family.
Yeah.
Yes.
that-
Yep, the counseling services available.
Yes, that's perfect,
For any
yes,
student, and,
totally. Yeah. And then, I think this could be, go to a board.
All right, I think so.
And it's 8:49.
With that, yes, we've gotten through the public policies that were on our agenda, and so it's the time for public comment, if anybody would like to speak. Please state your name and confirm your residency in the township.
Good evening, Sarah Johnson, I'm a resident of the township. I wanted to speak on policy 912, but first I just wanted to clarify something about the immunization policy. I wouldn't use smallpox as an example because the smallpox vaccine, it hasn't been given in America since like 1970, so none of the students at Haverford have the smallpox vaccine. You'd have to be like in your 50s or over to have received it, so that's probably not a good example. But in regards to 912, what I'm really trying to figure out is, Dr. Rushi, why does it have to be an AR? Because earlier you said something like this, I've never brought before the board, but if policy 912 is an AR, isn't the whole point of it that it wouldn't come before the board?
There's a policy and an AR.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, it's not voted on by the board, is that correct? So say an outside entity wants to come in, like a university wants to come in and do research. it's not presented to the board, is that correct? It would only be presented to the superintendent for approval.
Yes, that's correct. The board wouldn't vote upon it.
But why? Like, I'm just wondering, if it happens so infrequently, then why do we need the AR? Like, instead of it being an AR, why couldn't it be, okay, you know, say, I don't know, UPenn wants to come in and do research. Why couldn't it be something that the board votes on? And this way the public is aware of it.
And we can take that under consideration.
Because that's my concern about it. Like, you know, everybody keeps saying, oh, Dr. Rushi, but I mean, I assume you want to retire at some point, so you won't always be the superintendent. And like Dr. Larson brought up this, you know, issue of pay to play. So, I mean, we're putting this policy in place that's giving one person the ability to bring in outside entities and use, you know, the students, the staff, the school buildings, you know, which are taxpayer money pays for. And then, you know, and I know the other thing that's been brought up a lot is that these are for-profit companies, and most universities are for-profit. And experimental research goes on at universities. So I just really think it's important that the public is aware of what's going on, and putting it just with one person to approve. You know, I understand that the parents can opt out and the students can opt out, but still we're bringing in outside entities. And I do appreciate that they have to do the background checks and all of that, but I think this is opening up a really, really gray area. And I'm just wondering why, like, Mr. Barbetta, did you request the AR? Like, where did the AR come from?
You know, there are policies that have administrative regulations, then those administrative regulations identify how that policy is best put into action.
So my question is, why did you guys decide that that would be the best course of action to make it an AR? Like, Mr. Rabbit, is that what most districts do?
We don't make decisions in these committee meetings.
But many of our policies have administrative regulations to go along with them to help the district administrators know how to implement the policy, which is more of a statement of purpose and guidance.
Okay.
So,
And what you've suggested this evening, I mean, the policy is going to come back to committee. It's not moving forward. So this is the opportunity for the board members to, you know, hear from the public. And as this moves forwards, some things may be incorporated into that.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
They won't respond tonight to that.
yeah, no, I know. I'm just, at some point, I just think since it happens so infrequently, why not just make it public? Like, I can understand if this was something that happened every week and you don't have time to bring it before the public or the board, but if it's something that's only happening at this point, never, then I don't think it needs to be an AR. I think it's much safer for the
The board
district.
can consider that.
Okay, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. That comment is noted. Thank you. Any other members of the public would like to speak?
Come on.
It's your turn, yes.
I probably intend to speak, but
You're so inspired.
One that
I'll make a note. We are trying to wrap this up at 9 o'clock.
Oh, you mean I talk too long? Okay,
I'm
first,
just putting it out there.
The root cause of me being here is that I had said to Antoinette that I would come to a policy meeting. And the other night,
She sold it so
said,
much.
"We have one Monday, if you want to come." So I
So
came.
happy my influence worked the other night.
To come out tonight. And I'm glad I did because it was very informative. And I want to just say a couple of words about Title I. As some of you may know already, I was Title I reading coordinator at University City High School in Philadelphia for 20 years. The word you want to use in your policy is parental involvement. Parental engagement is an adversarial process. The connotation, that's what countries do when they go to war. That's what Ukraine and Russia are engaged in now. The operative word that the regulations stand for, the federal regulations, are parental involvement, okay? I also think that you should keep in and family. It's parental, parent, guardian, and family. And the reason why the Code of Federal Regulation has that in it is a lot of times grandparents, like myself, are the main caregivers for the grandchildren. I am not the guardian, I am not the parent, I am authorized by my son, who is a single parent of an autistic child, to speak on behalf of him and on behalf of my grandson, okay? If something happened to my son, I would be the one that would be involved in, you know, as a Title I person. My son would qualify for poverty if it weren't for living with me, okay? And many children who live in poverty, whether in Philadelphia or out here, their parents or their grandparents and other cousins and sisters even are the ones who are involved in their education. So I advise you to keep that in our policy and be consistent. If there was a legal battle between a policy that didn't contain and family, and I were involved, I would win the argument that it's the law and it has to include family. Okay, you're not going to win that in a litigation situation. So just put it in there so we know that. Okay, and I forget the other one. Oh, there's a case we need on the free speech issue. Tinker v. I forget what it, Des Moines or something. I just used it in a brief a while ago. The Constitution does not stop at the schoolhouse door. Although the correct answer on my bar exam, that their time, place, and manner restrictions are almost always upheld as legal. Okay, but not overly, you know, ones for the students especially. And even the teachers have a right to free speech when they walk through the schoolhouse door. But thank you for what you're doing. And Christmas to all, happy holidays with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Not
you.
every school district does such a thorough job reviewing policies. And I appreciate the effort that everyone goes in.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak tonight?
Hi, good evening. I'm Colleen Palmer-Smith. I'm a resident here in Haverford. I want to wish you all Happy New Year and Happy Holidays. I just have a question, and I just keep going over it in my mind. There was discussion this meeting, last meeting, and surveys, and we keep talking about it, and the policy 912. We keep talking about, you know, it's opt-out, opt-out. You know, parents under the federal regulations, it's opt-in. You know, they have to have, you know, give consent to opt-in. Why are we saying opt-out, opt-out? I mean, we should really be looking at it. And I know, Dr. Rushi, at the last meeting, you had said, honestly, it's, you know, parents don't always respond to that. You know, it's unfortunate in the time that we live in, but, you know, we have the right as parents, you know, to sign off on that for our children. And when we're looking for that in the future, I think, you know, there's a reason why the regulation. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, you might have to spend more time, you know, getting that parent to consent. But I think these surveys and what we're doing, and we look at policy, you have to include the parent. And this district for a long time has moved away from, in my opinion, valuing parent and parental input. And I saw that with my own, you know, older children that have gone through the school. And it was dramatically different. What occurred, I saw it occurring throughout the years of engagement with my own children, you know, who are a 2019 and a 2021 graduate. And it's significantly less parental, you know, time in our schools with my younger daughter. And I could see that break, that your doors are kind of like closed, and it's kind of evident in some of the policies that's being created. You know, parents are key in all this, and the federal regulations say, you know, parents have the right to opt in. And everything you're doing is like opt out, opt out. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, just to clarify, I think in the board's 912, the opt-in language was proposed. Is that correct here tonight? Or we picked that up, and the ongoing consent is a requirement of that. And yeah, this set of policies covers different groups or, aspects of the work that we do, but certainly under the Title I parental involvement policy, there was a lot of emphasis on the way that we engage and work with parents in the curricular programs. So hopefully we see more of that going forward. Anyone else for tonight? All right, 9:02. Thank you everyone for your attention and good work going through the 7 policies that were on tonight's agenda. Our business is concluded. Good night.